The sound of the vacuum mixed with the distant echo of classical music that filled the mansion's marble hallways. Karen, in a worn uniform and calloused hands, scrubbed the granite floor with firm but discreet movements. The smell of the furniture polish spread through the air, blending with the expensive perfume that Veronica Collins had sprayed minutes before. Nobody noticed her. No one ever noticed. But her watchful eyes saw it all, the looks of contempt, the whispers charged with arrogance, the muffled laughter that treated her as if she were invisible. How many women have lived like this, swallowing humiliations in silence so as not to lose the family's livelihood? Each morning before sunrise, she drove across Los Angeles in 2 crowded buses, leaving behind the small East LA apartment where her elderly mother cared for her 8-year-old daughter. He carried in his chest not only the pain of the endless journeys, but also the dignity of those who never allowed themselves to be corrupted. It was in this silent force that a secret was hidden. Behind the simple uniform, there was a courage that no one imagined, and that luxury mansion, she didn't know it yet, but she was about to witness the day when the invisible would become a hero. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. In that luxury mansion, amidst laughter, toasts, and secrets hidden behind heavy curtains, something terrible happened. It was a clear afternoon in Beverly Hills when the young heir, surrounded by friends and flattery, fell unconscious into the crystal-clear pool in front of everyone who had done nothing. The silence was broken by screams of terror, but only a woman in a simple uniform, marked by humiliation and invisibility, had the courage to jump without thinking twice. Karen, the cleaning lady no one saw, threw herself against contempt and fear, and it was there that everyone's fate began to change. And this is where I ask for something from the heart. If you believe that stories of courage and faith deserve to be remembered, leave your like and subscribe now, because your every gesture is like a silent hug to all women who have been humiliated but never stopped fighting. It is thus, together, that we give voice to those who have always been silenced. The clock was barely 5 in the morning when the old alarm clock sounded insistently in the cramped room of East LA. Karen woke up every day at this same time, even before the sun rose, to brew a cup of weak coffee that warmed her tired hands. At the small Formica table, next to her 8-year-old daughter Sophia, she adjusted her worn and patched uniform, running her hand over the fabric as if asking for strength for another day. His mother, Mrs. Dolores, remained in a nearby armchair, wrapped in a faded blanket, coughing low, her body already weakened by the years and by diseases that could never be treated properly. In that simple home, each morning was a silent battle against poverty, but also an act of love. After breakfast, Karen walked to the bus stop, holding tight to her battered purse. The cold of dawn still cut her skin, the smell of fresh bread from the bakeries began to spread, and she followed in silence. The first bus was packed with workers crowded, faces closed by haste. She was still standing, balancing on the curves, her gaze lost through the window, thinking about what she would still have to face in that mansion that would never be hers, but where she knew every corner better than the owners themselves. He arrived in Beverly Hills just before 8. The difference was brutal. Wide streets, impeccably pruned trees, electronic gates, imported cars parked in front of houses that looked like they came out of movies. Karen passed through the gate of the Collins mansion with her head bowed, discreetly greeted the security guard who rarely answered, and once inside, she turned into shadow. There, no one knew his story. No one wanted to know if he had a family, dreams, or pain. She was just the cleaning lady. The corridors were adorned with paintings by famous artists, marble sculptures and crystal chandeliers. As he passed the cloth over the polished floor, he saw his own distorted reflection, as if the glow of that wealth was unable to recognize its existence. With each room cleaned, each towel folded, she erased traces of parties, arguments and secrets, but remained invisible. Veronica, the mistress, almost never called her by name, just snapped her fingers or said, You. Richard, the tycoon, treated her as if she were part of the furniture. She was there to serve, and nothing more. Ethan, the teenage son, made a point of laughing when he saw her carrying heavy buckets, as if it were fun to put someone who was already kneeling on the floor. And yet, in the silence of that mansion, there was something that no one saw. Karen watched everything. She knew the schedules, the muffled fights behind closed doors, the glances Veronica exchanged with a business friend when Richard was not around. She also saw the hidden tears of Ethan, a boy who feigned strength in front of his friends, but who, in his room, looked at his cell phone as if looking for an escape from his solitude. Karen never judged. She just kept it. And so, he carried within him secrets that could shake those marble walls. In the late afternoon, after hours of work, I would return home with my feet throbbing. In the humble neighborhood of East LA, the contrast was stark. There were no imported cars, but children playing barefoot in the street, neighbors who shared the little they had, and sincere smiles that warmed the heart. Karen was respected. For many, she was an example of struggle. A woman who supported her daughter alone, took care of her sick mother, and never stopped smiling. Neighbors called her a warrior, although she did not see herself that way. For her, she just did what needed to be done. It was on one of these nights that, watching Sophia sleep, Karen felt a deep tightness in her chest. She thought about how many women like her spent their lives serving in silence, swallowing humiliations, supporting families without ever receiving recognition. Her heart spoke louder, like a cry that echoed to all the others. How many times are we treated as invisible, but we are still standing? This thought weighed like lead, but it also made her resist. If you've ever felt this weight, if you've ever been ignored even though you're doing your best, write in the comments, "I believe," because, like Karen, thousands carry in silence a strength that no one imagines. The days repeated themselves, but every detail fed a growing tension. At the mansion, Karen heard cut conversations about Richard's shady dealings, saw Veronica smile for cameras, but barely looked at her own son. Ethan, increasingly rebellious, spent money on parties and drinks, humiliated the employees, but his arrogance hid a void that only someone attentive like Karen could perceive. Each day, she felt like something was about to happen. A strange fate haunted that family, as if the silence they kept was about to be broken. And deep in her heart, even without understanding, Karen carried an intuition. There was a moment when the cleaning uniform would no longer be enough to hide who she really was. But how long could that invisible life remain intact? It was a clear morning in Beverly Hills, and the Collins mansion looked even more imposing in the golden light streaming through the stained glass windows. Karen, in her already slightly worn blue uniform, walked through the dining room in silence, arranging the glasses and cutlery on the long table where Veronica would receive some friends from high society. The smell of freshly picked roses filled the room, mixed with the sweet aroma of imported coffee served in fine porcelain cups. Every detail had to be impeccable, and Karen knew it. His hands trembled slightly, but his attentive eyes checked the slightest spaces between glasses and plates, because that was how he survived, anticipating the next look of reproach. When he finished, he took a step back and took a deep breath. Everything seemed to be in order. But for Veronica, it never was. The woman entered the room with her thin heels hitting the marble, her lips painted red, and an expensive perfume that filled the air as if she wanted to suffocate. She walked over to the table, ran her eyes over it quickly, and stopped in front of a glass, slightly out of position, something anyone else wouldn't even notice. A heavy silence took over the room when Veronica raised the glass with 2 fingers and showed it to everyone, as if it were proof of a crime. "That's why I say that trusting uneducated people is always a risk," he declared, his voice full of contempt. The guests laughed softly. Some covered their mouths in false embarrassment, but none defended Karen. The sound of laughter echoed like shrapnel inside her, each laugh sounding like a reminder that, for these women, her existence was nothing more than a mistake. Ethan, who was watching the scene leaning against the doorframe, did not resist. He laughed mockingly, loud enough to mingle with the whispers of the guests, and added, "Mom, maybe she doesn't even know how to hold a glass, let alone set a table like that." His gaze bore the cruel glow of youth that had never known the pain of lack, and Karen felt her face burn. Inside, it was as if an invisible hand pushed her to the ground, but she didn't allow herself to fall. He lowered his head, took a deep breath, and held back his tears as tightly as he held the tea towel between his fingers. She remembered Sophia, her daughter, and the phrase she always repeated before going to sleep, "God is seeing everything, my girl, and at the right time the truth comes out." This memory was what kept her standing, even though the desire was to disappear from there. The environment was still impregnated with laughter and crooked looks. Veronica's friends whispered, throwing low phrases like daggers, "Is this the kind of people they let into the house? Imagine the dirt they bring with them. God forbid I depend on it." And every comment went through Karen's heart, but she remained silent. There was no room for defense, because any word would be transformed into a reason for further humiliation. When she finished arranging the glass in the right place, Karen just took a step back and stood firm, even though inside her soul begged for a hug, for someone who said that it wasn't fair. Time seemed to freeze. The glow of the chandeliers reflected on the clean floor, but for her, that hall had become a stage of public humiliation. And there, in front of everyone, Karen understood once again that wealth did not guarantee greatness. There was a silent pain that united thousands of women like her, the pain of being invisible, of being judged by her uniform, of having her value reduced to an insignificant error. And, in the background, a question echoed. How many others had swallowed tears in silence so as not to lose their jobs? Karen's heart was beating fast, but her eyes were fixed on the ground, where her shadow seemed smaller than ever. However, there was something in that shadow that the rich did not see. It was the mark of resistance. She knew that every humiliation was a wound, but it was also proof that she was still standing. And as he discreetly collected the napkins, he felt a certainty invade his soul. God was watching, but the mansion still had no idea of the price it would pay for treating a life with such contempt. After all, how long would that silence be bearable? Karen walked away from the table still with a heavy heart, but as she folded her napkins, her mind traveled away from there to the dusty roads of the Texas countryside, where her life had begun hard and unevenly. He remembered the simple wooden house where he had grown up with his brothers, the noise of the wind hitting the cracks, and the constant smell of dry earth that permeated everything. Since she was a little girl, she knew the weight of the word lack. There was a lack of food, a lack of shoes, a lack of respect. The neighbors looked askance at his Mexican family, as if they were foreigners in a land that was also theirs. At school, she learned to swallow offenses quietly, because talking only increased the laughter of others. His youth was marked by working in the fields, picking fruit under the scorching sun, while dreaming of a different future, but not knowing how to achieve it. It was in this scenario that she met Miguel, a young man with an easy smile and promises too big for the reality in which they lived. She married early, believing that he would be the partner with whom she would share the burden, but quickly discovered that she had been mistaken. Miguel sank into alcohol, and each bottle emptied seemed to carry with it any trace of responsibility. The nights were long, full of arguments, and the days full of frustration. When she became pregnant with Sophia, she thought that perhaps the arrival of her daughter could change course, but Miguel disappeared shortly after birth, leaving only debts and scars. Alone, Karen was faced with the biggest challenge of her life, raising a daughter in the midst of misery and loneliness. The memory of the first time he held Sophia still brought tears to his eyes. The small face, the gentle breathing, the warmth of the fragile skin, and a promise that came from his lips almost like a prayer. "I will never let you lack anything." This phrase became her north, the compass that kept her moving, even when exhaustion and despair tried to overcome her. Every plate of food he could put on the table, every pair of shoes he bought with sacrifice, was living proof that his promise was being fulfilled. Life in Los Angeles came as a breath of hope. He heard about jobs in the city, from wealthy families who hired cleaners. He took a bus with his young daughter and her mother, Dolores, carrying only a suitcase with used clothes and a faith that stubbornly did not die. The first few months were a struggle. They slept in a cramped room, sharing the space with cockroaches and peeling walls, but Karen never complained. Dolores, even with her fragile health, helped as she could, taking care of Sophia while her daughter faced long working hours. Sophia's smile, when she saw her return home at the end of the day, was the fuel that kept her standing. Sometimes, as she watched the girl sleep, Karen reflected on the invisible mark she carried. It was not only the wrinkles of exhaustion or the calluses on the hands, but also the wounds of abandonment, the humiliations accumulated since childhood, and the forced silence of those who learned to swallow injustices. She knew she wasn't the only one. How many women had already been left behind, supporting alone the lives that other men had left? How many mothers had promised, like her, that they would do everything to make their children lack nothing? These memories came like waves, whenever she was humiliated by the Collinses. But instead of weakness, they brought a silent strength, like roots that cling to the earth even in the midst of the storm. When Veronica exposed her in front of guests, or when Ethan laughed at her condition, Karen didn't just see the present. She saw every time her mother had taught her to resist, every tear held back so as not to frighten Sophia, every battle won in silence. It was this story that no one knew, hidden behind the simple uniform and the downcast gaze. Deep down, Karen knew. That promise she made to her daughter was the line that sustained her, the reason for her courage. And as he cleaned the glass that Veronica had used to humiliate her, he felt the memory of Dolores's voice echo. "Daughter, we were born to fight, and only those who fight know the value of victory." A lump formed in her throat, but she looked up for a moment, staring at the reflection of the chandelier in the crystal. There was pain in her story, but there was also something more powerful, the certainty that her life would not always be invisible. Because every wound holds a hidden strength in itself, waiting for the right time to be revealed. But what Karen didn't know yet was that that time was much closer than she could have imagined, and when it did, none of the Collins would be able to turn off the light that would surface. After all, what happens when the invisible woman decides to face the gaze of the world? The sun began to descend behind the hills of Beverly Hills, painting the sky with orange and gold tones. The backyard of the Collins mansion, immense and silent, looked like a magazine set. Trimmed gardens, shimmering fountains, and marble statues imported from Europe. Karen walked with the bucket in her hands, picking up dry leaves that fell from the autumn trees. He moved slowly, as if he didn't want to attract attention. Her every step was measured, every gesture discreet, because he knew that for the Collinses, her presence should be almost imperceptible, as if it were just another detail of the landscape. As he swept near the pool, he heard a muffled sob. He paused for a moment, frowning, and followed the sound coming from behind one of the stone columns. There, huddled together, was Lucas, the Collinses' nephew. She was only 10 years old, her eyes full of tears, and her face hidden between her knees. It wasn't the first time Karen had seen him alone. At parties, he used to walk away, ignored by adults who preferred to talk about business or parade expensive dresses. Approaching carefully, Karen crouched next to him. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked in a soft voice, the same one he used to calm Sophia when she had nightmares. Lucas raised his red eyes, surprised that someone had noticed his pain. "No one ever asks me that," he muttered. Karen sighed deeply, feeling her heart tighten. She took a handkerchief from the pocket of her uniform and handed it to him. "Here, he cleans his face. You don't have to hide." The boy hesitated but accepted, wiping away his tears. They were silent for a few seconds, listening only to the distant noise of the pool's waterfall. Then Lucas whispered, as if confessing a dangerous secret, They fight all the time. My uncle and Aunt Veronica. They scream so loud that sometimes I wake up at dawn." Karen kept calm, but inside she felt a mixture of pain and indignation. That boy, so small, already carried the weight of adult indifference. "You know, Lucas," she said, choosing her words carefully, "sometimes adults forget that children hear and feel everything, but it's not your fault." The boy looked at her with teary eyes. "Do you think they'd miss me if I disappeared?" The question cut Karen inside like a blade. He reached out and held his firmly. "Of course they would. You are precious, Lucas. Never doubt that." He kept quiet, absorbing those words he might never have heard. For a moment, he no longer looked like the nephew of millionaires, but just a child in need of affection, like so many Karen had seen in her neighborhood. The silence between the two was full of meaning. It was there, in the imposing backyard of that cold house, that an unexpected alliance was born. The invisible woman and the ignored boy found solace in each other. Karen knew she couldn't solve all of his problems, but she could offer what no one else did: listening, caring, attention. As she lightly stroked the boy's hair, a memory of Sophia invaded her mind. She thought of her daughter, also 10 years old, waiting for her in a simple apartment but full of love, and it was at that moment that Karen's heart opened even more. She followed in silence, carrying that weight that no one saw. And if you're following this story right now, feeling touched by all this, leave a like and subscribe. It is the most beautiful way to show that this pain has not gone unnoticed, that Karen's struggle, and that of so many invisible women, finds an echo in the hearts of those who listen. Lucas took a deep breath and for the first time sketched a shy smile. "You're different, Karen," he said quietly. "Inside, no one talks to me like that." She smiled back, but her eyes watered. "Sometimes, Lucas, being different is what saves us." The boy then leaned closer, as if he was about to reveal an even bigger secret. He looked around, making sure no one was listening, and whispered, "I've heard things I shouldn't. I think Aunt Veronica wants to do something bad." Karen's heart raced, but before she could ask any more, the glass door of the mansion opened, and Veronica's voice echoed through the yard, calling the boy. Lucas cringed immediately, and Karen felt a shiver run down her spine. What had he heard, and how far was Veronica willing to go? The Collins mansion looked more like an illuminated palace on that summer night. Tall palm trees were decorated with golden lights, colorful spotlights swept across the Los Angeles sky, and a trail of sports cars lined up at the entrance, bringing wealthy young people dressed in designer clothes. It was Ethan's 16th birthday, and Richard hadn't saved a penny to turn the party into a spectacle. Renowned DJs, fresh sushi tables, an exclusive bar for soft drinks and imported juices, uniformed waiters running from one side to the other. It was the showcase of unlimited wealth. In the midst of that frenzy, Karen moved silently, carrying a tray of crystal goblets. The blue uniform contrasted with the bright dresses and expensive suits of the guests. She walked slowly, balancing everything carefully, while the young people laughed loudly, dived into the lighted pool, and showed off state-of-the-art cell phones as if they were disposable toys. Each laugh sounded like a cruel reminder of the distance between the worlds. Ethan was at the center of it all, surrounded by friends who exalted him as if he were a prince. She received expensive gifts, a Swiss watch that sparkled in the light of the track, a pair of rare sneakers that cost more than Karen's annual salary, a sports car wrapped in a red bow that drew applause and cheers from the crowd. He smiled arrogantly, receiving the gifts as if they were natural rights, and at no time did he look at the employees who made this dazzling party possible. Karen, standing in a corner, watched everything in silence. His heart sank at the thought of Sophia, his daughter, who celebrated birthdays with simple homemade cakes and improvised gifts, such as a rag doll she had once sewn herself. And yet, her daughter's smile always seemed purer than all the loud laughter in that pool. The contrast was overwhelming. While Ethan showed off the gifts in front of his friends' cameras, Karen collected dirty glasses that they left on the marble floor. When she bent down to clean, she heard the laughter of the guests mocking the cleaning lady. One of them even commented, "These people should be forbidden to appear at parties. They ruin the photos." Karen pretended not to hear but felt her face burn. The pain came not only from humiliation, but from invisibility. To them, she was nothing more than a blur in the landscape, someone who should have been there, but unnoticed. In the kitchen, the movement was frenetic. Luxurious dishes were prepared in a hurry to meet the young people who always asked for more. Karen wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, taking a deep breath to stand firm. He looked out the window and saw Veronica smiling, elegant in her silver dress, flaunting in front of the other mothers as if the party was more about her than about her son. Richard, for his part, paced back and forth, making sure everything was perfect, more concerned with the comments of the businessmen present than with Ethan's genuine happiness. For a moment, Karen wondered if Ethan would ever learn the value of simple things, if he had ever felt the warmth of a sincere hug or the joy of sharing a piece of bread. That was the question that hammered his heart. When she returned to the room, carrying another tray, Karen saw Ethan push one of the waiters just to laugh with her friends. The young man fell, knocking over glasses and smearing his suit with soda. Instead of helping, Ethan just laughed, calling him clumsy. The scene made Karen close her eyes for a second, holding the tray tightly so as not to tremble. It was more than arrogance. It was the certainty of impunity. And in that inner silence, a memory came to light, the promise he had made to his daughter, never to allow her to lack dignity. Karen swallowed hard and went back to work, but a flame lit inside her. As the music echoed loud and vibrant, and the fireworks lit up the Beverly Hills sky, Karen knew she was in the middle of something much bigger than a simple birthday. There was a strange energy hanging in the air, a foreboding hard to ignore. Because behind all that glow, there were deep cracks that were beginning to open, and the question that kept popping into his mind was, what would happen when this perfect party was interrupted by the inevitable shock of truth? The music echoed through the illuminated gardens, vibrating in the air, as if the party were an endless spectacle. The colored lights reflected off the pool, creating shimmering waves that enchanted the guests. But for Karen, everything seemed distant, almost unreal. She was crossing the room with a tray of glasses when she felt Veronica's cold gaze rest on her. The mistress approached slowly, with the same venomous smile that always announced trouble. "Look at that," she said aloud, attracting the attention of her friends around her. "It seems that our cleaning lady doesn't know her place. He keeps looking too much at the guests, as if he wanted something." The comment fell like a stone in the air, and the laughter echoed almost immediately. One of the women whispered, "Yes, you always expect something hidden from that guy." Ethan, already with his face flushed from the night's attention, did not miss the chance to hurt even more. "Be careful, guys. Check your pockets. You never know when she might think she deserves a gift like that," he said, drawing cruel laughter from his friends. Karen paused, the tray steady in her hands, her eyes fixed on the polished marble floor. His heart beat fast, as if he wanted to escape from his chest, but the dignity he carried inside him was stronger than the tears that burned in his eyes. Still, in a calm voice, she ventured to say, "I have never disrespected this house, ma'am. I'm just doing my job." Veronica came closer, the strong perfume invading Karen's space, and hissed ironically, "Then do it in silence. No one is interested in your opinion. Go back to your seat." The final blow came from Richard, who appeared among the guests, bothered by the scene. "Veronica, don't waste time. Karen, shut up and do your job right. Don't ruin my son's party." The weight of those words fell like a hammer, crushing any possibility of defense. Karen took a deep breath, lowered her eyes, and moved again. But inside, something broke. It wasn't just another humiliation. It was the confirmation that for them, she was nothing more than a shadow, a disposable figure. As she collected abandoned glasses and dirty napkins, she felt the stares burning her back. It was as if every laugh was a sentence, every joke a stone thrown at his dignity. The invisible camera of life focused on his face, where teary eyes sparkled but did not fall. Because inside her was something the Collins couldn't steal, the quiet certainty that her life had value. And it is at this point that I need to tell you something important. The most remarkable moment of this story is yet to come. Stay with me until the end, because what seems like just another humiliation will turn into something that no one in that mansion could ever imagine. Karen walked the halls with slow steps, the muffled sound of the music in the background contrasting with the heavy silence she carried inside. Every detail of the luxury around him, the crystal chandeliers, the expensive sculptures, the plentiful tables, seemed to mock the simplicity of his life. But instead of hatred, what grew in his heart was a silent force. The memory of her daughter awaited her like a safe haven. Sophia's smile, pure and true, was her resistance against the contempt of the world. And as she discreetly adjusted the chairs, Karen felt something strange in the air. Lucas, the shy nephew, watched her from afar, with a serious and worried expression. He seemed to want to get closer, as if he had something urgent to say, but he hesitated when he saw Veronica talking to other guests. The boy disappeared into the crowd, leaving Karen with a knot in her stomach. The party went on, the laughter increased, but beneath that shimmering surface a thread of tension began to stretch dangerously. Something was about to happen, and everyone's life in that mansion would never be the same again. The question that echoed, silent and unsettling, was, who would really pay the price for so much arrogance? The Los Angeles sky burst with color. Fireworks lit up the night as Ethan's party reached its peak. The loud music mixed with the screams and laughter of the teenagers gathered around the pool. Ethan, already reeling from the excess of drink he hid in disguised glasses, climbed to one of the highest ledges, wanting to show courage in front of his friends. "Look at what a Collins is capable of doing," he shouted, puffing out his chest, his smile full of arrogance and carelessness. Cell phones rose, ready to film the show. Karen, carrying a tray of empty glasses, watched from afar, her heart racing. There was something in the boy's eyes that unsettled her, a mixture of defiance and emptiness that reminded her of so many young people she had seen get lost. For a moment, she thought about shouting for him to come down, but she swallowed her words. It wasn't his place. No one would listen. Ethan opened his arms, launched himself into the air, and for a brief second, the world seemed to stop. The impact on the water went wrong. The body hit hard, and soon silence took over. He did not emerge. First came the confused laughter, then the screams. Some guests approached the edge, but only to film with their cell phones, hoping it was just a joke. Time passed, and the surface of the water remained intact, except for the bubbles that rose slowly. Richard was paralyzed, the glass in his hand shaking without reaction. Veronica let out a high-pitched scream and fainted in the arms of a friend. Panic spread like fire in dry straw, but no one, absolutely no one, took the plunge. Karen felt her blood run cold. The tray slipped out of her hands, the glasses shattered on the floor, but she didn't care. Her maternal heart spoke louder than fear, louder than the humiliations she had swallowed minutes before. It was as if a greater force pushed her forward. As she ran towards the pool, a deep truth pierced her like a knife. How many times does life put the invisible to carry the weight that the powerful cannot bear? If you're hearing this right now and have felt this way, with an unfair weight on your back, comment here, "I understand," because this silent pain is more common than you might think. Karen ran, her steady steps against the stone floor, ignoring the incredulous looks. She jumped into the pool without hesitation, her uniform sticking to her body the instant the icy water enveloped her. She dove deep, opening her eyes in the blue maelstrom until she found Ethan sunken, inert, his face pale and his hair floating like algae. Her heart was racing. Every second felt like a century. She held him by the shoulders, pulling with all her strength from his tired arms. The surface seemed distant, unreachable, but the courage of a mother who vowed never to let her son lack anything was the flame that pushed her upwards. As she emerged, holding Ethan in her arms, the screams exploded even louder. Some recoiled in horror, others filmed in despair, but none of them dared to approach. Karen, her eyes burning with water and effort, knew that this moment would change everything. The question that hung in the air was inevitable. Was there still time to save the millionaire's son? The icy water burned Karen's skin, but nothing mattered but the inert body she held onto with all her might. Ethan was heavy, her arms trembled, but her determination was greater than the fatigue that consumed her daily. Each stroke against the resistance of the pool seemed like a cry of despair, as if time was against it. When he finally emerged, panting, dragging the boy to the edge, silence took over the party. The cell phones continued to record, but no one moved to help. Karen's teary eyes sought support in the crowd, but she found only astonishment and immobility. She laid him down on the wet floor, his uniform glued to his body, and fell to his knees beside him. Ethan was not breathing, his face pale as porcelain. Karen's hands trembled as she tilted the boy's head back, trying to remember every instruction she had seen in the basic first aid courses offered in her neighborhood years earlier. She brought her lips together, blew air into his lungs, pressed his chest hard, and repeated the gesture, tears mixing with the flowing water. "God, don't let this boy die, please. Not in front of me," he murmured between breaths, his voice broken but full of faith. All around, Richard remained static, unable to act. Veronica, fainting, was shaken by her friends. The guests huddled together, some crying, others just filming, as if they were in front of a spectacle and not a life hanging by a thread. Karen's heart seemed to want to leave her chest, each beat more painful than the last. Mouth-to-mouth breathing became a living prayer, a dialogue between her and God, where each breath carried not only air, but also the promise of a mother who knew the value of life. The world seemed suspended, every second dragging on, until a fragile sob escaped Ethan's lips. His chest rose, coughing up water, and Karen fell backwards, crying with relief. The crowd erupted in screams, some of relief, others of confusion, but all with their eyes fixed on her, the woman whom, until minutes before, no one could see. Still panting, Karen held the boy's hand, as if to ensure that he would not escape again. And at that moment, for the first time, she was seen, not as a cleaning lady, not as a shadow, but as the heroine who defied contempt and arrogance to save a life. But if the eyes were now on her, what would those who had always treated her as invisible in the face of this impossible truth to hide do? Ethan still coughed, spitting out the water that seemed to choke him, while Karen remained on her knees by his side, her trembling hands resting on the wet floor. The uniform was heavy, glued to his body, his hair ran water over his face, but his eyes did not leave the boy who had just returned from the abyss. The silence that followed was strange, almost uncomfortable, as if everyone was trying to understand what had really happened. Richard was the first to move. He moved forward with firm steps, though his expression was more of embarrassment than genuine concern. He bent down close to his son, took him by the shoulders, and in a cold voice said, "It's all right, son. He is saved." Not a glance at Karen, not a word of recognition for what she had just done. Veronica, still stretched out on the floor, slowly opened her eyes and brought her hand to her forehead theatrically, as if her fainting was more worthy of attention than the life that had almost been lost. Her friends rushed to her aid, spraying perfume on her face, while whispering to each other about the scene. Around the pool, the guests exchanged restless looks. Some murmured that the cleaning lady's courage had been incredible. Others laughed softly, mocking the dramatic who threw herself into the pool as if she were a soap opera heroine. Karen stood up slowly, her breathing heavy, her knees scratched by the rough floor. She felt the gazes weigh on her, but there was no warmth in them, only curiosity and judgment. He stood, the water running in puddles all around, and held the cloth he still had attached to his pocket. It was the only sign of her condition, as if the universe made a point of reminding her that, for those people, she was still just the cleaning lady. Her heart was still racing, and inside, a mixture of tiredness and indignation burned in silence, because, despite having just saved the life of the millionaire's son, the thanks he expected did not come. And that's where I need to open my heart to you. If this piece of her life can become a mirror or even a hug for someone watching right now, will it help me move it forward? Like and subscribe here. It makes more difference than you think, because stories like Karen's cannot be forgotten. Ethan, still weak, tried to get up, leaning on his father. Richard led him into the mansion without even saying a word to Karen. Veronica, in turn, stood up with help, looking her up and down with the same contempt as always, as if nothing had changed. The party was in ruins, the guests torn between shock and gossip. Some repeated in low voices, "She saved the boy," while others just shook their heads, already worried about how this episode would tarnish the perfect image of the Collins family. Karen remained motionless, the water dripping, her eyes fixed on the void. She felt strangely alone in the midst of that sea of people. He knew he had done the right thing, but he also knew that for that cold elite, nothing that came from his humble hands would be a reason for honor. Even so, she remained erect, as someone who carries within herself a dignity that no one can erase. But what Karen didn't imagine is that, behind the closed doors of the mansion, the rescue would not be seen as an act of heroism, but as the beginning of something even more dangerous. After all, who in that house would be willing to turn her courage into a reason for gratitude, and who would use it as a weapon against her? The sun had barely risen when Karen stepped through the gates of the mansion again, her uniform still damp from the night before, impregnated by the smell of chlorine and the weight of what had happened. Her body ached as if she had run for miles, but it was the soul that felt it the most. She hoped in secret that maybe that day would be different, that a simple thank you could come from the one who owed her the most precious asset. However, what he found was another scene. In the main room, Richard was standing, his arms crossed, and Veronica beside him, her face full of fury. "We need to talk," said the mistress, her voice dry as a blade. Karen stopped, still holding the cleaning cloth, and waited. "Veronica, didn't take long. What you did yesterday was a spectacle. You threw yourself into the pool, made a scene, attracted looks that shouldn't be on you. Who do you think you are to put yourself at the center of that party?" Karen widened her eyes, not believing what she heard. Richard tried to intervene, but Veronica cut him off, facing him with the weight of someone who controls every step of the family. "Don't you understand? If this falls in the media, they will say that the security of our house failed, that our son almost died in front of everyone, and more, that a cleaning lady had to intervene because we didn't do anything. It's humiliating. She can ruin our image if she decides to open her mouth." Karen, with her head down, felt her chest twitch. There was no pride in his hands, only the memory of having done what was right. But in front of those cold eyes, his courage seemed to be turned into a crime. Richard cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Maybe you'd better step back a bit, Karen. We don't want misunderstandings." Those words echoed like a verdict. The woman who had saved a life was now seen as a threat. She took a deep breath, her eyes teary, but did not answer. He knew that any word would be used against him. He returned to work in silence, cleaning the same marbles that reflected the contempt he received, and at the end of the day, he left the mansion with shuffling steps. The road back to East LA seemed longer than ever. On the bus, he looked out the window, the tears finally escaping. He silently wondered why, even when he gave his all, the world insisted on denying dignity to the invisible. But when she opened the door of her house, she found the warmth she needed so much. Sophia ran to her, hugging her legs tightly. "Mommy, I heard you saved someone. You are a heroine." Dolores, sitting in the armchair with her blanket, smiled with tired eyes. "Daughter, no one erases the truth before God. They can shut you up here on earth, but heaven has seen what you did." Karen fell to her knees, hugging her daughter, and there, between those simple walls, she found the courage that the mansion was trying to snatch from. And it is at this point that I tell you something from the bottom of my heart. Stories like this remind us that the truth always finds a way to shine, even when they try to erase it. So, stay with me until the end, because what is yet to happen will prove that the strength of the invisible is greater than any power of those who think they are untouchable. Karen wiped her eyes, kissed her daughter's forehead, and thought to herself, if they believe they can bury me in silence, they have no idea what God has in store for those who are humiliated. But the question that hung in the air was inevitable. What was Veronica willing to do to ensure that the truth never left those walls? Karen returned to the mansion the next day with slow steps, carrying the weight of fear in her every move. She knew that she was being watched closely, that Veronica was looking for a way to make her guilty of something she hadn't done. The air seemed denser, the corridors colder. Every cross-look from older employees who feared losing their jobs for approaching her increased her sense of isolation. But there was a pair of eyes that didn't judge her, those of Lucas, the forgotten nephew. He was waiting for her in the backyard, restless, as if he were keeping a secret about to explode. "Karen," said the boy, pulling her by the arm to a hidden corner of the garden, "I must show you something." From his jacket pocket, he took out a small, old cell phone with a cracked screen. "I recorded some things at the party. Nobody knows that I was filming. I want you to keep it." Karen, confused, accepted the device and, that night in her small apartment, sat next to her sleeping daughter and began to watch the videos. Her heart raced when she saw the exact moment when Ethan, drunk, climbed on the edge of the pool. The shaky footage showed the laughter of friends, the teasing, and soon after the cursed jump. The cameras clearly captured the wrong impact and the sinking body. Then the figure of her appeared, a soaked uniform diving without hesitation. For the first time, Karen saw herself as others might see herself, not as an invisible cleaning lady, but as the only one who had the courage. Her eyes filled with tears, but she kept watching. In one of the videos, recorded more closely, it was possible to hear cruel comments from guests. "These immigrants think they are. People in uniform should know her place. Go see she did it on purpose to show up." Karen pressed her phone to her chest, feeling a mixture of pain and hope. He knew that those images were more than memories. They were proof that it was not a threat, but salvation. Evidence that if they tried to destroy it, he could show the truth. However, he also felt the weight of responsibility. Putting away that cell phone was like carrying a silent bomb. If Veronica found out, it could make her life even more difficult. Still, he hid the device inside a sewing box, in the back of the wardrobe, as if hiding a treasure. When she lay down, she couldn't sleep. She kept repeating to herself that maybe God had put that boy in her path for a reason. Lucas, ignored by the adults, had given him a chance to protect himself. Even the forgotten have a voice, she thought, and that truth burned like fire inside her. The night wore on, and Karen wondered if she had the strength to face what was to come. Because deep down, he sensed that the war against her was just beginning. And the question that echoed in her heart was inevitable. How far would Veronica be willing to go to silence the woman everyone was trying to keep invisible? Richard's office exuded power, the bookshelves covered with hardcover books he had never read, the paintings by renowned painters, the polished mahogany table that reflected the yellowish lights of the crystal lamps. Karen entered with shy steps, holding the cloth still wet with cleaning products, and immediately realized that something was wrong. Richard was sitting behind the desk, his gaze heavy, and next to him, a closed leather briefcase, as if hiding a secret. "Sit down," he ordered in a dry voice, without even looking directly at her. Karen remained standing. I had already learned that when someone in that house said, "Sit down," it was not an invitation. It was a disguised order. But she kept her posture, her gaze down, and waited. Richard cleared his throat, opened the briefcase slowly, and left stacks of $100 bills on display. The smell of new paper filled the air, an aggressive contrast to the sweat of work that permeated Karen's hands. "Do you see that?" he asked, pushing the folder in his direction. "This amount is enough to change his life. More than you would earn in years of scrubbing floors in this home. All I want is simple. You forget what happened." He doesn't talk to anyone. He doesn't give interviews. He doesn't comment with neighbors. He doesn't try to take advantage of the situation. Karen looked up for the first time. The tears she had held back since the humiliation of the party threatened to fall again, but her voice came out firm, surprising even herself. "Mr. Collins, I have not bought my dignity, and I will not sell it." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard slammed his hand on the table, making the briefcase tremble. "You don't understand what you're risking. I can destroy your life in the blink of an eye. Who will believe a cleaning lady's word against mine?" Karen took a deep breath, feeling her heart hammer in her chest. God believes, and he saw it all. The simple answer, but loaded with truth, set the room on fire. Richard stood up suddenly, his face red with fury, and approached until he was a few inches away from her. "You're going to regret it. I'll make sure I never get work in this city again. It will go back to the hole it came from." Karen, with heavy breathing, stood firm. She held the cleaning cloth as if it were a shield, but inside her something bigger rose, the certainty that she was not alone. "You can take everything from me except the truth. And that's what keeps me going." For a moment, the two were silent, like two opposing worlds facing each other. The arrogant power that believed itself to be eternal, and the indestructible humility of someone who learned to resist from the cradle. Richard, unable to cope with that unexpected courage, retreated, slamming the office door violently. Karen left the room with firm steps, her heart on fire. She knew that she had declared war on a powerful family, but he also knew that a life built on the truth never fears threats. What she still couldn't imagine was how far Richard and Veronica would go to destroy her, and whether she was prepared to face the coming storm. The club hall in Malibu gleamed like a temple of power. The tables were covered with white linen tablecloths. The orchid arrangements exuded a sweet, understated perfume, and the crystal chandeliers cast golden reflections over neat suits and silk dresses. Influential businessmen, smiling politicians, and socialites from high society circulated through the space, toasting with glasses of expensive wine while talking about business and electoral campaigns. In the background, like a shadow among those figures of artificial glow, was Karen. Summoned only to serve, she walked with the tray firm in her hands, the simple uniform clashing with the sophistication of the environment. His heart was racing, not only because of the fatigue of the routine, but because he knew he was treading on a minefield. In the center, Veronica slid among the guests with a studied smile, hugging and kissing cheeks as if she were the perfect hostess. But her eyes, cold and calculating, did not leave Karen, and it was in the middle of a toast, when the whole room was attentive to Richard's words about tradition and family responsibility, that Veronica decided to act. He stood up, raising his voice with the assurance of someone who dominates the stage. "I want to clarify something that has been circulating in whispers in recent days. This story that a cleaning lady saved my son is an exaggeration. The truth is that Ethan was never in real danger. But certain people have found it convenient to invent a spectacle to promote themselves." The silence fell like a heavy curtain. All eyes turned to Karen, who remained motionless, her sweaty hands around the tray. Her heart tightened, as if it were crushed, and for a moment she thought about stepping back, swallowing the humiliation as she had always done. But before he could decide, a childish but firm voice echoed from the back of the room. "That's not true." Lucas appeared among the guests, carrying a portable projector and the old cell phone he kept as a treasure. He climbed on a chair, the small figure standing out against the luxury of the environment, and connected the device. In seconds, the images were projected on the improvised screen, drawing sighs and murmurs. The shaky video showed Ethan staggering, climbing on the edge of the pool, laughing in front of his friends. The awkward jump, the brutal impact, the body sinking without reaction, then the stifled scream of the crowd, and finally Karen, his soaked blue uniform, the accurate dive, the desperate effort to pull the boy afloat. The scene continued, raw and incontestable, also revealing the prejudiced comments, the laughter that treated his courage as a cheap spectacle. The hall was absolutely silent. Businessmen who had previously smiled now looked at each other in shock. Politicians cleared their throats, embarrassed. Richard lowered his eyes, unable to sustain his own image. Veronica, for her part, turned pale, her lips quivering without finding words. And Karen, standing in the back, didn't have to say anything. His truth, so often stifled, shone before everyone. But if the truth finally came out, a burning question remained in the air. How would that family, accustomed to silencing uncomfortable voices, react to seeing their power shattered in front of so many important people? The video still projected the image of Karen pulling Ethan from the pool when the murmurs turned into outraged voices. One of the older businessmen stood up, slamming his hand on the table, and said in a firm tone, "This is unacceptable. You chose to silence the truth rather than acknowledge the courage of this woman." Other guests nodded, some shook their heads in disapproval, and soon the glamorous atmosphere gave way to a wave of sharp criticism. Richard tried to compose himself, standing up with an artificial smile. "There was a misunderstanding. My wife just wanted to protect the family's privacy." But his words echoed hollow, weightless, and no one seemed convinced. Veronica, who until minutes before had walked like a queen among the rich, was now pale, being the target of contemptuous looks and muffled giggles. One socialite whispered loud enough to be heard, "She's always wanted to be the center of attention, and now she has, for the wrong reason." The final blow came from Ethan. Still frail, but overcome with shame, he stood up and faced the guests. The voice came out choked, but sincere. "If it weren't for her, I would be dead. I laughed at her, humiliated her, treated her like nothing. But the truth is that I owe my life to this woman." The silence that followed was heavy, cutting, until someone began to clap their hands. First shy, then strong, and in a few seconds the whole room applauded Karen, who remained motionless in the background, her simple uniform drenched in emotion. It was as if, for an instant, the invisible had become the center of the world. And it is at this point that I tell you something that comes from the bottom of the soul. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling we help another heart to breathe. Enjoy this video and subscribe, and let's make this story reach those who need to hear that courage never goes unnoticed. As the applause echoed, Richard and Veronica sank into silence. The power that sustained the family began to crumble before everyone, their perfect image now tarnished by the contempt they had for those who had saved their son. And Karen, still standing, with tears in her eyes, knew that this was just the beginning. Because if the elite had finally seen the truth, it remained to be seen. What would the Collins do to try to recover what they lost? The news ran faster than anyone could have imagined. The morning after dinner in Malibu, Karen's image spread across the front pages of local newspapers and morning television programs. "Cleaning lady saves millionaire heir at luxury party." The headline stamped her tired face, still soaked from the night she dived into the pool. The presenters repeated the video, recorded by Lucas, showing the audience what the elite had tried to hide. The courage of a simple woman in the face of collective indifference. Karen, in her small apartment in East LA, watched everything in disbelief. The old television in the living room projected her own figure, and she barely recognized that woman. For her, it was nothing more than an instinctive gesture, but now the world pointed to her as a hero. Sophia, radiant, hugged his waist. "Mommy, everyone knows you're a real hero." Dolores, moved, wiped her eyes and said, "I always knew, daughter. All that was missing was for the world to see." On the same day, reporters began knocking on his door. With a heavy heart, Karen agreed to give a brief interview. He didn't use far-fetched words. He didn't try to appear bigger than he was. She looked at the camera sincerely and said only, "I just did what any mother would do. If it were my son there, I would hope someone would have the courage to jump too." The simplicity of the answer won even more hearts. In her community, neighbors gathered on the street to greet her when she returned from the market. They brought flowers, filled her with hugs. Some ladies prayed, thanking her for her life. For the first time in many years, Karen felt the weight of invisibility begin to unravel. She was no longer just the cleaning lady. She was a symbol of courage for simple people like her. On the other side of the city, the reality was quite different. Veronica locked herself in the mansion, avoiding any contact, her image ridiculed in the circles of the elite that had previously applauded her. Richard faced tense calls with investors, trying to justify why the Collins family was in the headlines not for a big deal, but for trying to humiliate the woman who had saved his son. The contrast was stark. While Karen gained respect and affection, the Collins sank into shame and isolation. And this is where I need to tell you something from the bottom of my heart. Sometimes life seems to crush the righteous and exalt the undeserving, but the truth always finds a way to appear. Stay with me until the end, because the most remarkable moment of this story is yet to come, and when it comes, it will be impossible not to be moved. That night, Karen lay down next to her daughter, exhausted but serene. The distant noise of the city mingled with the silence of the small room, and she silently thanked God, believing that maybe, finally, her life could change. But deep down, an uneasiness still accompanied her. What would the Collins, wounded and humiliated, do to try to regain lost power? The following days brought Karen a new reality she had never imagined. The simple telephone at home rang non-stop. Invitations to television programs, job proposals, requests for interviews. Some were tempting offers, jobs in the luxury homes of families who now saw her as trustworthy, management positions at companies that wanted to associate their names with the image of a brave woman, even invitations to pose in advertising campaigns. But what touched her heart most deeply was a phone call from a foundation in Los Angeles dedicated to defending the rights of immigrant workers. "We want you to be with us, Karen. Her story is an example of dignity, and we need voices like yours," said the director, with a sincerity that crossed the line. Karen took a deep breath, her hands trembling, and accepted. Not out of vanity, but because she felt that finally, her struggle could help other women like her, so many who still remained invisible. In a short time, he began to participate in lectures in schools and community centers. She went on stage shyly, but when she started to speak, her voice gained firmness. "I'm no different from any of you," she said, looking into the eyes of young immigrants, single mothers, workers in uniform. "Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing the right thing, even when no one believes in you." The audience was moved. Some cried, others gave a standing ovation. With each lecture, Karen felt that she was accomplishing something greater than herself. She was giving hope back to those who had already given up on being seen. Despite the recognition, his personal life has changed little. He continued to live in the same modest apartment in East LA, sharing the cramped space with Sophia and Dolores. The neighbors, however, received her as a heroine. They brought flowers, wrote letters, even organized a small community party to celebrate their courage. Karen, smiling, helped serve the dishes, hugged each one and said, "I didn't do anything alone. It was God who gave me strength." He refused luxuries, refused invitations to move to more upscale neighborhoods. "This is my home," he explained. "This is where I learned to resist, and this is where I want to stay." The routine has not lost its simplicity. She still cooked rice and beans. She folded her clothes on the clothesline. She still accompanied Sophia to school. The only detail that was different was that now, on every corner, someone greeted her with admiration, as if she were a close friend. This filled her with gratitude, but also with humility. Each night before going to sleep, she said a silent prayer, thanking for the chance to continue being who she was, even in the face of changing looks. And yet, behind all this transformation, a shadow still haunted his heart, because while the world cheered, the Collinses sank into silence and shame, and no one knew what the next move would be for a family they had never accepted losing. After all, how far would Veronica and Richard's wounded pride go in the face of the rise of the one they always tried to silence? Sunday dawned serene, and Karen decided to walk to the small church in Boyle Heights, a simple temple with white walls and worn wooden pews, but full of human warmth. The sound of the choir rehearsing was already echoing through the street when she pushed the door open and entered, immediately smelling the perfume of incense mixed with the aroma of fresh flowers that worshippers had brought. He walked to the altar slowly, as if carrying more questions than answers in his chest, and knelt down. The uniform wasn't there, but her essence remained the same: calloused hands, eyes marked by sleepless nights, and a heart full of gratitude. Silently he murmured, "Lord, never let me forget who I am. Never let me forget where I came from, nor the battles that made me stand up." The tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of recognition, of knowing that her life, once invisible, had now served to touch so many others. The pastor took to the pulpit, his voice firm and emotional. "Many here believe that they need to be strong, rich, or powerful for God to use them. But I say, God chooses the invisible to work miracles. He raises up those whom the world despises to show where the true value lies." The words echoed in Karen's chest as a confirmation. He looked around and saw women in uniform, men tired of hard work, young people who fought against prejudice. Each face there seemed to carry a piece of its own history, and it was impossible not to think how many other Karens were there in that neighborhood, in the city, in the world. How many women were, at that very moment, swallowing tears while cleaning other people's houses, supporting children with the strength of invisible arms, keeping secrets that would never be reported. A lady behind her was crying softly. A young man was raising his hands in prayer, and Karen felt that her story was no longer hers alone. It was a collective reflection, a wound, and a shared hope. And it is at this point that the narrative seems to look deep into the eyes of those who listen. If the life of a simple cleaning lady was able to change destinies, what other stories are hidden before us, waiting only for the courage to come to light? The service ended in soft singing, and Karen left light-hearted, walking along the narrow sidewalk while the wind played with her hair. But deep down, even in peace, he knew that the battle was not yet completely won. Because if God had given her a chance to be heard, the world still harbored silent enemies, and the question that burned in the air was inevitable. What would be the Collins' last blow against the woman who dared to challenge their silence? The sunset painted the Los Angeles sky in shades of orange and gold as Karen walked down the simple street of her neighborhood, holding hands with Sophia and supporting her mother, Dolores, who smiled as she felt the light wind on her face. There was no luxury, but there was peace, and that peace was worth more than any mansion. Karen looked at her daughter and in a soft voice whispered, "Good always wins, my daughter." In the background, almost as a silent sign of change, Ethan appeared helping in a community project, carrying boxes of food and showing that even the most arrogant can learn from the courage of those they once despised. The viewer's heart finds a relief here. The invisible woman was now recognized, but never lost her essence, because this story isn't just about a cleaning lady, it's about all of us. It reminds us that dignity is priceless, that faith sustains when all seems lost, and that the courage of those who serve in silence can transform entire destinies. Thank you for walking here with me, for having felt every tear and every victory of Karen. If this video warmed you up in any way, leave a like. It's like a hug that supports and strengthens the channel. Sign up too, because it's like an invitation to have a coffee together again in the next story. Write in the comments of which city you're watching, I really want to know the place where this story came to you, and it activates the bell, so you don't lose it when the coffee is ironed again. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.